The conference room screen flickered as Derek pulled up the slide. My name appeared in red text under a header that read, Non-Essential Roles. 50 faces stared back at me through webcam squares. Nobody spoke. Derek didn't even glance my way as he clicked to the next slide, already discussing budget allocations. My pulse hammered in my ears, but my face stayed frozen. 12 years at Techford Solutions reduced to 2 words on a Monday morning call. I watched Derek's mouth move, explaining efficiency and streamlining, while my brain tried to process what had just happened. Someone in the gallery view shifted uncomfortably. A hand reached for a mute button. The label hung there, permanent and public. Non-essential. I realized with sudden clarity that he'd chosen this moment deliberately. He wanted witnesses. Kept my camera on. I didn't flinch. I didn't type anything in the chat. Inside, something cold and sharp crystallized in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something more useful. Calculation. Derek had planned this execution carefully. He'd marked me for removal in the most humiliating way possible, in front of colleagues who relied on my work daily. He smiled slightly as he moved through the rest of his presentation, confident and comfortable. I watched him perform, watched him enjoy this. My hand stayed still on my keyboard. I made my face neutral, professional. Let him think I was broken. Let him think this was over. He had no idea what he'd just set in motion. That was the moment my career at Techford died. But it was also the moment something else began. I didn't know it yet, sitting in my home office with my name still glowing red on that slide. I didn't know that Derek's confidence would become his liability. I didn't know that labeling me non-essential would force him to prove it. And proving it would require him to function without me. I would make sure he got exactly that opportunity. The call ended. Faces disappeared from my screen. I sat in silence, staring at the blank monitor. Then I opened a new document and started writing down every single thing I actually did at Techford. The real list. Not my job description. The truth. My name is Kara Mitchell. I'm 43, American, and I built the operational backbone of Techford Solutions over 12 years. You've probably never heard of me. That's how I preferred it. I wasn't management. I wasn't client-facing. I was the person who made sure things actually worked. When projects stalled, I unstuck them. When systems failed, I fixed them. When departments couldn't communicate, I translated. I wasn't flashy. I didn't do performative busy work in meetings. I solved problems quietly and moved on. Apparently, that made me invisible. Derek had been my manager for 3 years. He never understood what I did. He understood titles and presentations and team-building exercises. He liked people who spoke his language. Enthusiastic, agreeable, optimistic even when reality said otherwise. I spoke in process maps and risk assessments. We were never going to mesh. Before that call, I believed certain things about work. I believed loyalty mattered. I believed consistency created security. I believed that if you made yourself useful, leadership would protect you. I'd survived 3 previous reorganizations at Techford. I'd trained managers who now sat 2 levels above me. I'd fixed disasters that never made it to executive awareness because I caught them early. I thought I'd built armor through competence. I was wrong. Competence without visibility is just free labor. I learned that lesson while watching my name get marked for deletion. Derek didn't hate me. That would have been simpler. He just didn't value what he couldn't see. He valued presentation over preparation. He valued confidence over accuracy. He valued people who made him feel smart. I made him feel unnecessary. That was my real crime. 5 minutes after the call ended, a message appeared in my inbox. From Derek. Subject line, transition planning. The message was brief and professional. Kara, as discussed, will need you to handle your transition documentation personally. Please prepare comprehensive handover materials for your replacement. We want this to be as smooth as possible. I read it 3 times. The word personally almost made me laugh. Smooth. He wanted smooth. He wanted me to package up 12 years of knowledge hand it to whoever he picked, and disappear quietly. He wanted me to make his decision look smart. I saved the email. Then I replied with one sentence. Could you please outline the specific scope of documentation you'd like completed? His response came back within an hour. Bullet points. Narrow. Confident. Missing about 70% of what I actually did. My first thought wasn't revenge. Revenge is emotional and messy and usually backfires. My first thought was much simpler. You have no idea what you just handed me. Derek thought he was removing dead weight. He thought he was making a clean cut. He didn't understand that I wasn't a department or a role. I was connective tissue. I was the reason his projects finished on time. I was why budget approvals didn't stall. I was why technical teams and business teams could actually work together without constant escalation. I'd built that infrastructure years ago, after cleaning up someone else's failed reorganization. I'd built it so well that it became invisible. Leadership depended on it. They just didn't know my fingerprints were all over it. Now Derek had given me permission to remove those fingerprints. Personally, I pulled up Techford's employee handbook. Specifically, the sections on role transitions and knowledge transfer. I'd helped write portions of it 5 years ago. I knew exactly what was required and what wasn't. The language was careful. Employees being transitioned were required to document their primary responsibilities and active projects. They were required to provide reasonable support during the handover period. Reasonable, primary, active. These words had definitions. Legal definitions. I'd made sure of that when we wrote the policy. I opened a spreadsheet and started listing my actual responsibilities. Then I highlighted the ones that fell under primary, according to my official job description. The gap between the two lists was stunning. 4 years, I'd been compensating for structural gaps that nobody else even noticed existed. Documentation day started at 8 in the morning. I worked methodically, creating clean handover files for every responsibility Derek had listed. Project status reports, process documentation, access credentials, contact list, everything organized, everything clear, nothing extra, no institutional knowledge, no workarounds, no notes about why certain people needed to be contacted before others, or why certain approvals needed specific language, or why some deadlines were actually flexible while others absolutely weren't. I documented what was asked for. Nothing more. Each file was professional and thorough and completely useless without context. I felt strangely calm as I worked. For the first time in years, I stopped carrying weight that wasn't officially mine. I stopped anticipating problems that weren't in my job description. I stopped filling gaps that leadership didn't know existed. It felt like setting down a heavy bag I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was there. 3 days after I submitted my documentation, something small broke. Not catastrophically. Just a deadline that slipped. A vendor contract that should have been renewed 2 weeks earlier but somehow fell through the cracks. I wasn't copied on the email chain. I watched it unfold from the sidelines, reading messages between confused team members trying to figure out whose responsibility it had been. My name never came up. Derek sent a message to the team about accountability and ownership. I smiled quietly at my desk. Not because anyone was suffering, but because it was starting. The invisible structure I'd built was beginning to show cracks now that I'd stopped maintaining it. And nobody could trace it back to me because I'd followed every policy perfectly. I'd done exactly what Derek asked. Nothing more. A week into my notice period, I overheard something during a department meeting. My mic was muted. Someone asked, "Should we loop Kara in on this?" There was a pause. Then Derek's voice. "No, she's transitioning out. We need to start handling these things without her." I listened as they tried to work through a problem I could have solved in 10 minutes. They went in circles for 20. Eventually they agreed to table it and regroup tomorrow. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. They weren't stupid. They were just missing information I'd never written down because nobody had ever asked me to. Information about relationships and timing and political dynamics that don't fit into process documentation. I'd been the institutional memory. Now that memory was walking out the door. My last day arrived without ceremony. No goodbye meeting. No acknowledgement email from leadership. Derek sent a brief message thanking me for my contributions and wishing me well. It was 3 sentences long. I logged off at exactly 5 o'clock. My laptop shut down with a soft click. I sat there for a moment in my home office, looking at the dark screen. 12 years. 3 sentences. I felt surprisingly peaceful. I'd handed over everything I was responsible for. I'd followed every rule. I'd been professional and thorough. Now I was free. And Techford was about to learn the difference between a job description and the actual work that keeps a company running. Packed my laptop. Then I sent one final email to HR, confirming my last day and thanking them for their support. Kept a copy for myself. 1 week after I left, my phone buzzed. A text from Victoria, a colleague I'd worked with for years. Hey, things are getting weird here. Approvals are taking forever. Did you know the quarterly review process was connected to your work? I typed back carefully. I documented everything I was responsible for in my transition files, which was completely true. Victoria replied, I think there was more than that. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The gap between my job description and my actual impact was starting to reveal itself. Projects that used to flow smoothly were now hitting unexpected delays. Questions that used to get answered quickly were now bouncing between departments. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing anyone could blame on a single person. Just friction. Accumulating. 2 weeks post-departure, I heard through another former colleague that executives were asking questions. Why were decisions taking longer? Why were approvals looping back for clarification? Why did teams seem to be waiting on each other more than before? Nobody mentioned my name directly. But I knew what they were discovering. All those smooth processes they'd taken for granted had depended on someone knowing exactly who to ask, when to ask, and how to frame the question. That someone was gone. Derek was in those meetings, I was told. He didn't have answers. He'd assumed the processes ran themselves. He'd assumed systems worked automatically. He'd never looked under the hood to see how much manual intervention kept everything moving. Now the engine was sputtering and he couldn't figure out why. 3 weeks after I left, something interesting happened. HR quietly updated the job posting for my replacement. The title changed. The salary range increased significantly. The responsibilities expanded. I saw the listing through a friend who still worked there. They'd reclassified my old role. It was now labeled Senior Operations Coordinator. Critical to business continuity. Required experience in cross-functional process management and stakeholder communication. I read the posting twice, then laughed once. Toughly. Alone in my apartment. They'd marked me non-essential. Now they were advertising my job as senior level and critical. The cognitive dissonance must have been uncomfortable for whoever wrote that description. I wondered if Derek had fought the reclassification. I wondered if anyone had pointed out the irony to his face. A month out, Victoria texted again. Derek's different in meetings now. He's less sure of himself. He's asking more questions. I didn't reply immediately. I was curious, but I didn't want to seem too interested. After an hour I sent back. People adapt to change differently. That night I couldn't help myself. I checked Techford's internal directory through a contact who still had access. Derek was now attending operational meetings he used to delegate. Project review meetings. Budget coordination sessions. Things he'd considered beneath his level before. He was trying to fill the gap himself. It wouldn't work. He didn't have the relationships. He didn't have the history. He didn't have the pattern recognition that comes from years of quietly solving problems before they escalated. He was learning the hard way that leadership titles don't automatically transfer operational knowledge. 6 weeks after my departure, I landed a new position at a smaller company. First day, first meeting, someone asked me, What do you think about this approach? I hesitated. Not because I didn't have an opinion, because I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be asked. At Techford, I'd learned to wait until problems became undeniable before offering solutions. Otherwise, I was overstepping or being negative. Here people wanted my input. They valued operational expertise. They understood that preventing problems was better than fixing them. My new manager actually read the reports I wrote. On my third day, she stopped by my desk and said, "Your analysis on the vendor contracts saved us from a real mess." Thank you. I'd been there 72 hours. Someone had already noticed my work. I thought about Derek, still figuring out what I used to do. 2 months after leaving Techford, I received an unexpected email. Not from Derek. From an executive I'd rarely interacted with directly. Patricia Reeves, VP of Operations. The subject line was simple. Conversation. The message was brief. She acknowledged that I'd left the company. She said operational inefficiencies had emerged during a recent internal review. She said my name had come up multiple times in relation to processes that were now struggling. She didn't ask me to come back. She didn't apologize. But there was something in the tone that felt like recognition. She ended with, "We didn't realize the scope of what you carried." I stared at the email for a long time. Then I closed it without responding. I didn't need to. The acknowledgement itself was enough. They'd finally seen what Derek couldn't. Around the same time, I learned through my still active network that an internal review had been launched. Not officially about me. About operational inefficiencies introduced during the recent restructuring. Emails were being pulled. Decision timelines were being mapped. My documentation was apparently being used as evidence, proof that the knowledge transfer had been completed according to policy, which meant the problems weren't caused by inadequate handover. They were caused by inadequate understanding of what the role actually required. Derek's judgment was being questioned, not loudly, not publicly, but senior leadership was asking why he'd eliminated a position that turned out to be critical. I wondered if he'd connected the dots yet. If he'd realized that marking me non-essential had forced him to prove I was non-essential. And he'd failed that test. 10 weeks post-departure, Victoria called me. Actually called, not texted. "They moved Derek," she said without preamble. "Moved him where?" Asked. "Lateral transfer. Different department. Less operational responsibility. They're calling it a strategic realignment of leadership focus." I translated silently. "Demotion without the label. Who's replacing him?" Asked. "Somebody external. They're bringing in someone with operational depth. Apparently." Victoria paused. "Everyone knows why this happened, Kara. Nobody's saying it out loud, but everyone knows." I thanked her for telling me and ended the call. I sat quietly for a few minutes, processing. Derek hadn't been fired. That would have been too obvious, too much of an admission that leadership had made a mistake. Instead, he'd been quietly moved aside. His arrogance hadn't exploded. It had collapsed inward, noticed only by people who paid close attention. That felt more satisfying than a dramatic firing would have. The person they'd hired to replace me, someone named Troy, lasted 6 weeks. I heard he left for another opportunity, but Victoria said he'd been overwhelmed. He kept asking where the real documentation was, she told me over coffee one Saturday. Like he had your handover files, but he kept saying there must be more. He couldn't figure out how you made everything connect. I sipped my coffee and said nothing. There wasn't more documentation. There was just experience. There was knowing that the finance director responded better to data in the morning. That the legal team needed 3 days' notice for contract reviews, not 2. That certain executives would block projects if they felt surprised, so you looped them in early and informally. That knowledge doesn't live in files. It lives in relationships and patterns and hundreds of small decisions made correctly over years. You can't hand that over in a transition document. 3 months after I left Techford, my new company promoted me. Not a big jump but meaningful. Project lead became senior project lead. My manager announced it in a team meeting and actually explained why. Consistent delivery, strong stakeholder management, proactive problem solving. Things I'd been doing for years at Techford without recognition. After the meeting, a teammate messaged me. Well deserved. You make all of us better. I read that message 3 times. Techford, I'd made people better too. I'd made Derek better. I'd made his entire department run smoothly while he took credit in executive meetings. The difference was that here people noticed. They valued it. They rewarded it. I thought about Derek in his new lateral role, probably still not understanding what had gone wrong. I didn't feel triumphant. Felt relieved. I'd found a place where competence didn't need to be loud to matter. 4 months out, the job posting for my old role appeared again. 3rd time. The salary range had increased again. The requirements had expanded again. They were now looking for someone with extensive cross-functional experience and proven ability to manage complex stakeholder relationships. They'd added executive presence to the description. I showed it to my partner over dinner. That's almost double what they paid you, she said, reading the salary range. And they called you non-essential. He nodded. They didn't know what they had until it was gone. She looked at me carefully. Do you feel vindicated? Thought about it. I feel free, I said. I spent years trying to prove my value to people who weren't looking. Now I work somewhere that sees it without me having to explain. That's better than vindication. 6 months after leaving Techford, I ran into someone from my old team at a professional conference. Talked briefly. She told me the department had stabilized but never quite recovered its previous efficiency. They'd hired 2 people to replace me. Both were good, she said, but they were still learning the ecosystem. Everyone talks about how smooth things used to run, she said. They just didn't notice it was smooth because you were there. A pause. Derek's gone, by the way. He left last month. I raised my eyebrows. Left or left? Left. Took a position somewhere else. Smaller company. Lateral move at best. I nodded slowly. His career hadn't imploded, but it had stalled. The rising trajectory he'd assumed would continue had flattened. Because when your success depends on people you don't value, eventually that foundation crumbles. They called me non-essential because they only measured what they could see. They saw meetings and presentations and official responsibilities. They didn't see the invisible work that held everything together. I didn't fight them. I didn't defend myself. I didn't try to explain what they were about to lose. I simply stopped doing all the things that weren't technically my job. I followed policy exactly. I documented precisely what was required. I handed over my official responsibilities with perfect professionalism. And then I left. The structure collapsed slowly, the way invisible things do. Not with drama, but with accumulating friction and missed connections and questions that used to have answers. By the time they understood what I'd actually done, I was somewhere else. Somewhere that understood the difference between a job description and the real work that makes companies function. Derek taught me something valuable that day. He marked me non-essential. He taught me that loyalty to people who don't see your value is just self-betrayal. So I stopped being loyal to Techford. I started being loyal to myself. And that was enough.